The question is always, again, is the human being just a body? Or are we a body? And are we a body made of matter? Because the whole concept of the human being, a body made of matter, is what I call the machine model. In order to try and make sense in a space of astonishing complexity, the only way you can make sense of it is by reducing the complexity to simplicity, which is what the Newtonian scientific model did. Well, as they started to divide the human being up, they came to cells and they said, oh, you see, the basic building blocks are cells. And then they broke the cells open and found atoms. And they said, oh, you see, the basic building blocks of the human body is atoms. And then they broke the atoms apart and found particles. Now, here we get into interesting stuff because particles are not matter. So the human body looks like it's made of matter, but actually matter is energy, slowed down to the point at which it becomes visible.
Greetings, seekers of ancient wisdom. In today's episode, we have a very esteemed guest, Dr. Brom. He has been a practicing medical doctor and a natural medical practitioner for decades. He's also published a book called Healthy Medicine, The Philosophy and Principles of Natural Medicine. Dr. Brom, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Always happy to speak to people and present my viewpoint, which is a little bit unorthodox, I think.
Well, on this show, the unorthodox is what we really appreciate and strive for, because I think that's where you really find the gems of true wisdom. So, Dr. Brom, maybe you can give us a quick overview how you got into medicine and how you got into natural medicine.
It started when I was about 12 years old, and my parents bought me a microscope. It was a little small microscope, and I remember it was in this lovely wooden box. Very excited to take it out, and then spent weeks and weeks looking down that microscope at various things that I caught. I can still remember looking down at a fly and this big eye looking at me, and I was fascinated by the fact that the microscope brought me into a world that I couldn't see with my natural eyes. Suddenly I realized that the world wasn't quite what I saw, that my eyes were limiting me, and I realized even my ears were limiting me, but my eyes were limiting me. And under the microscope, a whole new world opened up. And that was the first time that the question came up for me, what is this world really about? I'm not obviously seeing everything that's there. And that was the first moment that I was started to become excited about looking deeper, looking behind things, looking under things, what's really going on. And then when I must have been about 15 at school, Max Colley came to the school. And Max Colley was the best known hypnotist in South Africa at the time. And I can still remember clearly sitting in the audience and watching this father of a friend of mine going up onto the stage as a volunteer. And he was such an uninteresting man. He was a big, fat slob of a man that used to fall asleep in the bath, and we always used to laugh at him at the time. And I remember he walked up onto the stage, and Max Colley hypnotized him and gave him a broom and said to him, this broom is the most beautiful woman in the world. Dance with her. And he grabbed hold of this broom and danced across the stage in such an elegant way, in such a beautiful way. And I thought to myself, what's going on? This man has been hiding something deep inside him that I didn't even know about. I thought he was uninteresting. And here he was dancing on the stage beautifully, absolutely beautiful. It took my breath away. And then I knew that human beings are not what I'm seeing, that what I see about a human being is so limiting. It's just a surface, that each person hides something very astonishing and beautiful inside. And so those were the two things that started me off on my journey to try and inquire what's really going on. And I can remember going to various kinds of seances where people rubbed balls and sent messages, and people who spoke about life after death and all this kind of thing. And then my mind was totally blown open from that moment onwards. And then when it came to deciding on what I was going to do after school, I was initially going to follow my father, who was in business. But when I went to an occupational therapist and she did a various testing, she said to me, you know, you're a researcher, you're a scientist. I can see that. If you really think you're brilliant, then do a BSc, because then you can be in charge of your laboratory. But if you're not brilliant, you're going to end up cleaning test tubes. Why don't you do medicine? And I didn't think I was brilliant. I thought I was a pretty ordinary kind of guy, the thought of doing cleaning test tubes didn't please me. So I took up medicine. Actually, all my friends were doing medicine, so I decided to become a doctor then, not because I wanted to heal people, but because I wanted to do the research, and I wanted to have my own laboratory and to have my own technicians and to investigate deeper. So that's how it actually started and why I took up medicine in the first place.
So you had a very inquisitive mind, it sounds like. So at that time, even when you were in school, you were very inquisitive and even had this aptitude for research. Because, I mean, if I look at myself, I mean, it's only now that I appreciate research. But, you know, back when I was 17 years old, that was the last thing on my mind. So you were actually quite different, I think, you know, from your peers. I don't know if anyone else also wanted to get into research in your peer group, if you remember.
Not in the way that I knew there was something deeper. I just knew intrinsically that somehow what I was seeing about life. So I was always making inquiries about the edges. Where are these edges, you know, and can I jump over an edge? And so, yeah, I guess that was always my interest. Even and my parents were very normal parents. I mean, they weren't. My father was in business. My mother was just a housewife. So it didn't come from them. It came from something intrinsically in me around the fact that there was something in the world that was hiding from me, and I wanted to find out what it was all about. So when I can still remember in my final year of medicine, I mean, I was at UCT, very conventional medical practice, but I can still remember in my final year of medicine, I wrote an article on mind-body medicine. And that's interesting already, because that's already tells you that I was somehow relating the mind to 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 the mystery as well. That somehow by trying to understand the mind, and that hypnosis was a big thing for me, because I can remember still practicing hypnosis on my mother to get her to go to sleep. Very simple things I was doing, you know, just holding a pendulum and in front of her eyes and telling her to go deeper into sleep. And so I was already doing things like that. And magicians, I loved magicians because they were, yeah.
Was placebo testing like quite common then? I mean, a placebo, when they use a placebo to test the efficacy of a medicine, I mean, sometimes just giving the placebo gets the patient better, and that's like an indication of the power of the mind, right? Was that something that influenced also your opinion that the mind had this power over the body?
So in the early days, of course, it was really very basic stuff around my interest. Um, and in fact, what actually happened to me was I finished my medical degree and then did my internship. And then, for a number of reasons, I started to specialize straight away in gastroenterology. Um, and I did 2 years of gastroenterology here in South Africa. And then 1 year I went to America, because they said to me, in America, you can live your dream. And I was still 29 years old and wanting to live my dream. And so I went to America, and but after 7 months, I'd already lived my dream. I had my car, I had a motorboat, I had lots of women, parties all the time, and I was still unhappy. So I one and then one day, friend of mine, we woke up one early morning and on a Sunday morning to play a frisbee. We were throwing it to each other. And he said to me, why don't we give all this up? I was in Miami at the time in America. He said, we can give up our jobs and go live in an island. We're clever enough to just live quietly on an island and swim and do whatever we wanted to do. And I was so damn unhappy at the time in my practice, in hospital practice, and with the laboratory that I had set up, that I decided to give up medicine. And the next day, I went into my boss and told him I'm leaving, and I became an artist. And I eventually went to Europe, bought a Volkswagen Combi, and traveled around Europe for 3 years, and then to Sri Lanka, and then to India, and found my guru. And when I was living with my guru, he turned me around from recognizing that nothing outwardly was going to make me happy. It wasn't women, it wasn't the country I was living in, that the problem was me. I was the problem, and it was my attitude to life that needed to change. So he turned me around from looking outwardly for my happiness to turning inwardly. And eventually I came back to South Africa because my girlfriend that I was living with became pregnant, and we decided to have our family in South Africa. And when I came back to South Africa, I realized that hippies don't make money. I was a hippie. I've been a hippie for 6 years, traveling around and smoking cannabis every day. And I was still unhappy in a way, but I realized that hippies don't make money. And so I decided to go back into medicine. And I made a decision then in going back into medicine. I made a number of decisions. First, I made a decision, is it possible to practice medicine without drugs? That was my first decision, to find out whether you could treat ill health without drugs. Because I'd been a hippie for 6 years, and I'd watched people using acupuncture needles and laying on of hands and using herbs. And I became a bit curious about all that. So that was my first decision. The second thing that came along was there was a very famous naturopath in Cape Town, and I was given his cleansing diet. And his cleansing diet was incredibly simple. It was baked potatoes and onions and some green vegetables. That was his cleansing diet: potatoes, onions, and green vegetables. Because remember, I didn't know much. I mean, I'd heard people using all these herbs, but I didn't really know much at all. And there were only two products that I knew about. One was brewer's yeast, and the other one was kelp. Now, kelp is seaweed and is full of minerals. Brewer's yeast is full of vitamin Bs. So I started my practice by giving patients the cleansing diet, brewer's yeast and kelp, and no drugs. No drugs. But one thing I did do was spend time with patients. In the beginning, I didn't have many patients. I had time to speak to them. And so I learned that by changing their story, that people were coming to me with bad stories. They thought they were sick, they were ill, they couldn't get better, they had to have drugs. And so I learned that there was a way of changing a person's story from being negative and pessimistic about themselves and about their disease to becoming positive. And that's when I started to understand the power of the placebo response. So that's all I did. And I was fortunate in the first part of my practice to have, I was practicing up in the mountains of Stellenbosch, there between Stellenbosch and Franschhoek, up in the mountains. The people that came to me were all farm workers. They never asked what the names of the drugs I was giving them because I wasn't using drugs. They were kelp and brewer's yeast. They thought they were medicines. I had the right attitude towards them, and I gave them my diet: potatoes, onions, and greens. And I started to see absolutely astonishing, miraculous recoveries from people, from serious diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, all these kinds of problems that farm workers were suffering from, arthritis. I started to see recovery. And in no time, my practice had increased to the point where I was seeing 30 patients a day. It was a big practice. And people were getting better. And it took me a while to realize that part of the reason they were getting better, because those farm workers, first of all, nobody ever listened to them. Secondly, they were eating junk food from OK Bazaars and all packaged food. And I was putting them on to simple food, cheap food, but pure, simple, real food, and brewer's yeast and kelp. Well, there was a massive, massive change in the way their bodies operated, and they started to recover. And that's when I knew that I was on the right path. So the only drug I used in those early days, 1978, when I started, was vitamin penicillin, and Panado and aspirin. Those were the three medications that I still used in those early days. So that's how I started, and that's how I got slowly into natural medicine. I thought I was the only medical doctor in South Africa doing this kind of work, because I was up in Stellenbosch. I had no contact. I'd been away out of this country for 7 years. So I was a little island over there up in the mountains.
Dr. Brom, that was such a fascinating story of how you got into it and why you stuck with it. So I've got so many questions, but I wanted to start off with maybe some of the obvious ones. So this diet that you recommended, so it was baked potatoes, onions, and some green vegetables, bruce yeast, and kelp as supplements. So did your patient eat this diet 3 meals a day? Is that what they're doing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
See, they could have as much as they wanted to, and they had to try and stick to that. I used to call it my cleansing diet for the first month. After the first month, I allowed them to go to have some chicken and some other foods that they wanted to. So I started to open it up, and I said if they could stay on the cleansing diet for another month, that would be best. So, but yeah,
And and you would see results in a month. Is that what you're saying?
yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, diabetes disappearing.
It sounds like a silver bullet that you were using, like the one remedy treats everything. I mean, so you're using from diabetes to arthritis. You were saying it's like such a wide range of illnesses, right? And you were using this as your first step, just fixing the diet, getting nutrients back in the body, getting micronutrients, and that immediately made, just in 1 month, made a noticeable impact.
Yeah, so if you, I mean, it took me a while to understand what I was doing, because I'd come from a very, very conventional understanding of ill health, that there was health and then there was the disease, and that medical doctors treated the disease. It took me a while to suddenly realize that actually I had turned everything upside down here. I was no longer focusing on the disease. I was focusing on the health and supporting health, and that only health can heal. Disease can't heal anything. So focusing on disease, you end up with what's called symptomatic medicine. In other words, you're treating symptoms with very, very powerful agents which can interfere with functionality. Because if you look at the names of drugs, beta blockers, serotonin uptake inhibitors, antibiotics, all these names tell you what drugs do. Drugs work by interfering with a function. Beta blockers block the beta function. Serotonin uptake inhibitors interfere with serotonin. So they work, but they are symptomatic medicines. And because they interfere with function and are powerful enough to interfere with function, they have side effects. And the side effects are the result of interfering with function. So you're getting symptomatic relief, but you're not changing the condition of the problem. You're now creating another problem, because if you take in a serotonin uptake inhibitor, you're interfering with what the body is doing. The body makes serotonin and removes serotonin. So you're interfering with the whole physiological process with a drug. Drugs are incredibly powerful. All the antihypertensives, all of them block physiological function. Well, you can't block a physiological function without having problems, because the body now has to reconceptualize itself, because the body is always doing the best it can. Ill health is the best the body can do under the circumstance. It's not that the body wants to create ill health, but the body has to maintain essential functions. So in trying to maintain essential functions, when you've got a whole range of nutritional deficiencies, when you've got emotional tension pouring into the physical body, when you've got toxins in the body, all kinds of things which are interfering, well, the body is still trying to maintain function. It has to keep your pH constant. It has to keep your temperature constant. It has to digest the food and try and absorb all the best it can. But if there are poisons in the environment, and if you're under emotional tension all the time, and if your hormonals are being disrupted, well, the body has to find another way to keep this balance. The job of health is to maintain balance. And when it can't do that any longer because there's so many interference factors, then it starts to leak, as it were. It's like a fire that you're burning and you're not using the right wood and it's wet and all that. You get too much smoke. And in the end, the smoke can put out the fire. Well, disease is a little bit like smoke, as it were. It's interfering. But it's the best the body can do. It's the best the body can do. And it's so important to understand that the body is always doing the best it can do, and that healing is a quality of the body. Only health can heal. Nothing else can heal. There's no natural medicine that does any healing. There's no drug that does any healing. Drugs interfere. Natural medicines are used by the body to support healing. So what you want to do is to ask, okay, body, what do you need here that in order to do the healing that you can do only? Only health can heal. Health is intelligent. Health is magnificent. Health is the gold in the body.
So this is so different from the medical approach. Like, I have a few patients that come to me, my practice, and the biggest worry a lot of them have is cardiovascular disease, right? Cardiovascular disease being the number one killer at the moment. And the medical system are very good at putting this fear in everyone's mind. But now the cause, according to medical research, etc., is that cholesterol is the biggest cause of, arteries clogging and cardiac arrest and all these things. So that approach is saying, well, the body's got too much cholesterol in it. We need to shut down cholesterol production, so we recommend you take a statin, right? It sounds logical. If I'm a patient and the doctor tells me your cholesterol levels are too high because we did a blood test and your cholesterol is much too high, and then he shows me the risk of cardiovascular disease, and he says the best way to manage your illness is to reduce your cholesterol production through the use of a statin. And this is a very common thing around the world. I think there's millions and millions of people on statins for that reason. But why is that wrong if you're managing the cholesterol if the patient has too much of it? I'm just being a devil's advocate.
Yeah, look, so the whole question around the question around causes and effects. So let's go back to some principles here, because we can talk about cholesterol in a moment, but we need to understand the nature of causes and effects in terms of the image that one has of a human being. So the question is always, again, is the human being just a body? Are we a body? And are we a body made of matter? Because the whole concept of the human being, a body made of matter, is what I call the machine model. And the machine model is the understanding that has come about through this reductionistic, narrow-minded approach of human beings, because in order to try and make sense in a space of astonishing complexity, the only way you can make sense of it is by reducing the complexity to simplicity, which is what the Newtonian scientific model did. It said that, okay, let's try and find the basic building blocks of a human being. And so it's based on the model of a machine, because the machine is made of parts. Any sophisticated machine is made of parts that you put together, and eventually you have this complex machine like a computer, which can do all these amazing things. And therefore the whole idea in medicine was that, okay, human beings are nothing more than a more complex machine made of parts, and that built up from parts, and therefore we can take it apart to try and understand what it's all about. And that's the model. So we're going to break the human being apart, look inside it, and find all the different bits and pieces. And oh, you see, the body is made of a liver and a heart and blood vessels and their physiological processes, and that's machine model. Now, the question is a human being similar to a machine? And what happened in science, so the old science was the conventional model of a machine model, because it came out of this whole, they saw these very sophisticated clocks in the early days, and how clocks became more and more sophisticated. And so that's how this whole idea that human beings are a little bit like sophisticated clocks. So they started to divide the human body up, because they said, okay, let's find the basic building blocks. Well, as they started to divide the human being up, they came to cells, and they said, oh, you see, the basic building blocks are cells. And then they broke the cells open and found atoms. And they said, oh, you see, the basic building blocks of the human body is atoms. And then they broke the atoms apart and found particles. Now, here we get into interesting stuff, because particles are not matter. Particles are energy. And that energy is appearing and disappearing constantly. Particles, you can't capture a particle, first of all, because it's not matter. And it's disappearing as you go towards it. It disappears into the quantum potential and comes out of the quantum potential again. So human beings, the body is an illusion in a sense. Not that it doesn't exist. An illusion means that you're misunderstanding. A mirage is real, but it's an illusion. You're not understanding what it really is. You can't go and touch it and remove it. So the human body looks like it's made of matter, but actually matter is energy, slowed down to the point at which it becomes visible. Matter is energy slowed down to the point at which it becomes visible. The human body is not matter in the sense that we understand it. It's energy information. And Max Planck, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics, when he won his Nobel Prize, he made a speech and he said, I've been examining matter all my life, and I can tell you one thing, there's no such thing. It's only energy information. And behind energy information, he said, is some kind of intelligence that we don't understand. Because he knew that energy information alone has to have some kind of intelligence behind it all. So what we're dealing with when we're talking about a human being is what I call, and what I teach doctors, is called the greater anatomy. And what's the greater anatomy? The greater anatomy is matter, energy, information, quantum potential, and body, emotions, mind, spirit, consciousness. That's what we are. We are matter, energy, informational system, body, emotions, mind, spirit. So when you're looking in biochemistry only for an understanding of ill health, when ill health is not a problem of the body in one sense, it's a dysfunctionality of the system. Human beings are systems. They're not machines. They're not matter objects. We are emotional, mental, spiritual, consciousness, all these qualities. And we all know that all these other qualities energy, spirit, soul, emotions, all have an effect on the outward expression in the physical body. So when the conventional model talks about cholesterol, because you started there, cholesterol, I think what are they talking about? What they've done is reduce the human being to what can be measured, and said, okay, this is what a human being is. All the rest is subjective and not interesting. So they've dismissed soul, spirit. They've dismissed even emotions in one sense, because they say emotions is neurotransmitters. It's chemical. No proof. There's absolutely no proof that our emotions are chemical. You can't just inject serotonin and make a person happy. It doesn't work like that. So we need to understand that when we're talking about causes of ill health, I'm not saying that cholesterol has absolutely nothing to do with cardiovascular disease. All I'm saying is that it's one of the players. And how big a player it is, I'm not even sure how big it is, because the body can't exist without cholesterol. Cholesterol is needed for the brain. It's needed for every cell in the body. It's a cell membrane. It's absolutely an essential chemical. Trying to interfere with a functionality with a drug is seriously problematic to me, because it's talking about one small part of the being. We're not a body. We're an energy informational system, and with all these energetics around us today, I mean, I can use my remote to open up a heavy gate, a little remote button. It still surprises me every time I press this button and this heavy gate opens up. And then we think, oh, energy can't influence the human body. It's total nonsense. Cell phones are seriously problematic. 5G is seriously problematic. They're all problematic because they are interfering. And probably the most powerful energy informational problem is our emotions. Our emotions are seriously, anybody knows that if you get worked up, your heart goes faster, blood pressure goes up, muscles contract. I mean, even one of the examples that I often use for people, for example, let me ask you, do you know how to lift your hand up? Deepak, do you know how to? Now tell me how you do that. How do you do that?
Well, I think about it and then I just get my muscles to move in a certain direction.
Do you know how to do it? Do you know how to get those muscles? Do you know the chemistry involved? Do you know the nerves involved? Do you know the connections? Do you know any of that?
No, I don't know any of that.
No, you don't. So all you know is only your thinking is somehow your thinking connects to the control system, which knows how to lift your hand up. So you know how to ask the control system. That's all you know. Your thinking can't do it. Your thinking hasn't a clue. Walking down my steps is a total miracle. I have no idea how my body does it and where the controls are. All I know is that I want to walk down the steps and I do it, and my body follows. So we are miraculous beings, and we don't realize all I'm pointing to here is how your thought can influence your body. You want to lift your hand up, your hand goes up immediately in response. So you must remember that our emotions are even more powerful than the thought. Once the thinking connects to your emotions, your body is disrupted, or depending on what emotion you have. That's why love is such a healing commodity. Love has a healing vibration. Anger has a different kind of energy field in the body and can cause total disruptions in your body, major dysfunctions. And if you stay angry every day, long periods of time, all the time, you are causing ill health in that body. No question about it. So you're talking about cholesterol. All I'm saying is that it's yeah. All I'm saying is that it's a small part of this problem. I'm not saying it's not anything to do with heart disease. All I'm saying is that there are so many other factors involved. There are no single cause of any ill health. Every ill health has I mean, you've got toxins in the body, major toxins. You've got major nutritional deficiencies, vitamin D deficiency. 85% of people have vitamin D deficiency. 40% have magnesium deficiency. 30% selenium. Iodine is a major deficiency, so major that governments asked the salt company to put iodine into the salt, iodinized salt. They used to insist on iodine in bread because iodine is such a major deficiency. So all I'm saying is that everybody has major nutritional deficiencies. Everybody is subjected to major toxins, lead in petrol. Arsenic is in the soil. I mean, the amount of poisons that get dumped into the soil today is major. So where are we looking for the cause of ill health? What the doctors say, it's all unknown. We don't know. Of course they don't know because there's so many factors involved, but they do know. They know that there are poisons, that some of the cities are, Delhi is majorly polluted. Some of the big cities are unbelievably polluted all the time. And then people are still eating junk food. So, and then, too much sugar in their diet, processed foods, processed oils, which are seriously damaging. So, you're talking about cholesterol. Yeah, cholesterol is a small player for me.
So you're saying the medical system maybe just looks at the body. They completely ignore the energy and information aspect that we have. You mentioned that quite a lot, energy and information. So Dr. Bro, maybe can you distinguish between them? What is the difference between energy and information when you were talking about it?
So the best way to think about it is that you've got your TV set and you've got your broadcasting station. And between the broadcasting station and the TV set is all kinds of electrical cables and all kinds of antennas and things like that. So if you think in a very simple way, the electrical cable to your TV set carries electricity. And you need electricity. Well, you need the copper cable first. The copper cable is the matter. The electricity is the energy. But the energy and the copper cable alone won't give you a picture on the screen. You need information. So the information is carried by the electricity, which needs a copper cable, and then you need your screen. All that is required in order to see, and then you got your broadcasting station. So you can liken that to what's happening in the body. The body has energy. I mean, for example, a simple example is the electromagnetic recording of the heart, the ECG. Now, the ECG is astonishing. I mean, it travels all down to the feet and all the way up into the head and all the way to the tips of your fingers. That's the ECG. You can measure the electrical conductivity of the heart throughout the body. Now, one of the questions that I've often asked and never got an answer is, okay, we know there's an electromagnetic recording in the body from the heart. What does it do to the cells that they're passing through? You ask it to a cardiologist, you freak him out because he has no idea. So despite the fact that he's a cardiologist, because what do they do with the electromagnetic recording? They use it as a recording of heart function, that's all. In Chinese medicine, the heart is emperor. The heart is the emperor, and the emperor sends information to the whole kingdom. I mean, I love that image because for me, the heart has the electromagnetic recording, and the electromagnetic recording runs through every single cell in the body. What an astonishing thing is that? And then information is sent by the heart, the emperor, to every cell in the body and receives the information back. Beautiful image. The thing is that the electromagnetic recording of the heart can also be picked up 1 meter outside the body with sensitive instruments. So 1 meter outside your body, the electromagnetic recording of the heart can be picked up. So if two people are sitting across the way from each other and having a head-to-head conversation, what conversation are their hearts having? Their hearts are mingling. the heart recording is 1 meter outside the body. There's a mixing of energy fields of the heart. I mean, that's always astonished me. I mean, these are the kinds of things that always bring me to a sense of awe. Then when I think of the electromagnetic recording of the heart going throughout the whole body, feeding every single cell in the body with information, because we know that the heart is not just a pump. It's an organ of intelligence. That's why when you when you say I feel, you put your hands over your heart. When you say I think, you put your head. So the head is a thinking apparatus, but the heart feels. And according to the Heart Math Organization, the heart has connections to the brain, to the right brain. So the heart is constantly feeding information. That's where what is intuition? Intuition is when the brain says, I've got a good idea. Where's the good idea coming from? It's actually coming from the heart feeding the brain. So can you see what I'm trying to do here is to show that we're dealing with something, first of all, much more complex, much more awesome than most people think, because we have the conventional model has lumped us as a matter body, and physiology explains everything. Physiology explains nothing to me. Physiology moves at centimeters a second. There's no way that physiology can be where the controls are. Energy moves, light moves at 300,000 kilometers a second. 300,000 kilometers a second. The controls have to be much closer to that. The physiology is slow. Physiology is there's no way you're dealing with if I remember reading somewhere, human beings have 26 trillion cells in the body. 26 trillion cells in the body. They all have to be coordinated. You can't have cells deciding what to do. They have to all be in touch with some kind of underlying intelligence which is able to coordinate the different functionalities to maintain health.
Dr. Brom, I always like this analogy, and I sometimes explain it to my patients, to look at your body as a business, and you are the CEO sitting in the top floor of this very complicated business. It's got so many different departments and so many different functions, and you're the CEO, so you decide the direction of the business, but you don't really know what's going on in all these different departments. Now, one day you get an alarm on your dashboard, like beep, beep, beep. Something's wrong in the liver department, right? There's an alarm going off. You got a pain in the liver department. So you rush off to the doctor, and, they, like you said, they don't really look at the complexity of the system. They're just like, well, let's just put the alarm off and give you a pain remedy or give you something just to put the alarm off. So, if you're sitting in the CEO office, the alarm is going off 1 second, beep, 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 and then all of a sudden it's gone off. You're like, oh, okay. Seems like it's all good down there. Let's carry on with the day. And that seems the approach. Like, they don't even really fix the problem. They just sort of switch the symptom off, and the symptom is an alarm, right? The symptom is your body crying for help, telling you, hey, listen, there's a problem here. You need to do something about it. And that's what illness is, isn't it? It's like the body calling for your attention and for you to take some action.
Yeah, so my definition of ill health is that it's the voice of health. Illness is the voice of health. So in that sense, we have to be careful, because if it's the voice of health asking for help, then we start to ask different kinds of questions like, okay, health, what is it that you need from me here? How can I support you? Because I know that you are the healing agent, you are the healer. And if you're not able to maintain healthy functions and you're asking for help, because health doesn't make a noise, it doesn't make a noise. But when there's a noise, that's ill health. So ill health is the voice of health saying, I need some help. So you're quite right in thinking that. So the art then of medicine, and that's why I say that medicine is an art and not a science. And it's important to understand that because uh, it can't be a science because we don't know everything and we can't measure everything. So it can't be a science. Science means that you can measure, and that's why the conventional model has tried to reduce as much as they can to a package that they can have a sense of control and subject to science. But the whole of scientific medical science is a joke, is a total joke. I mean, if you take, for example, the so-called classical scientific understanding or methodology, where they have two groups, that's what they do. Two similar groups, because they have to give the one group the drug, the other group gets the placebo. Now, you tell me how you put two equal groups together when you're dealing with human beings. How can you have? I mean, you can have 100 people in the one group and 100 people in the other group. You've got 200 individuals. Now, how can you say you have two equal groups? Well, what they do is say, okay, all the people have high blood pressure. All the people are men. All the people are white men, let's say, for example. But that doesn't make them equal. They all are totally unique. Everybody knows that each person is a totally unique being. You can see it on their face. Their biochemistry will reflect their individuality. So there's no such thing as two equal groups. It's a total joke to me. I don't understand the so-called model, the gold standard of equal groups.
But this is the foundation of all research. Medical research is built on this whole principle like of taking cohorts of people and then giving one a placebo, giving one the real medicine, and then doing statistical tests at the end. And I mean, that's the whole foundation. You're saying that's a joke. That's what it's built on.
You can have 1,000 individuals. They say you've got to have a big enough number. You can have 1,000 in one group, 1,000 in another group. You've got 2,000 individuals with all kinds of different attitudes to life. Some of them are going to be Christian, some are going to be Muslim, some are going to be Jewish. They all got different philosophies, and we know that the philosophy that you have is going to have a different influence on your body. Even they have different biochemical profiles. So that, in fact, they don't even bother to do all the biochemical profiles because they're all going to be different. So even what's called normal is different.
But they do try and make them they do try and make them some homogenous group, like you said. So they say, oh, everyone's a white male with high blood pressure. So that's the similarity.
It means nothing. That they're not equal groups. So you can't do the so-called gold standard is nonsense, and that's the reason why they don't keep repeating studies over and over again, because every time they do another study with a different two groups, they're going to get different results, and that's why they play around with statistics to try and, I mean, I did research. I know what happens in research, how you leave out one, you find a good reason to leave out this particular person because he throws the whole graph out. So you say, oh, maybe something was wrong over there, and so let's leave him out because otherwise it doesn't look nice, your graph. So scientists play around with, sorry?
No, they come up with fancy terms. They say it's an outlier and we need to have a better sample, so exclude this.
It's nonsense. You see, all I'm saying is that human beings are so unique, so individual, and they're measuring a small part of the whole. How can you do a science that leaves out energy information when energy information is so powerful and has such a significant part to play in health and disease? So we're going to leave it out because we are biochemists and we are not physicists. So we only deal with the biochemistry of the human being. And so they make the assumption then that the whole control system is in biochemistry because that's their focus. But it can't be. Biochemistry moves much too slow. You've got trillions of cells, and they all have to be coordinated immediately. You can't have one system not understanding what another system is doing. They all have to work together. It's an astonishingly complex, miraculous process that goes on in the body.
I love this explanation that you did about the electromagnetic readings of the heart, right? And you can measure it throughout the body. Maybe that's actually what synchronizes all the cells, this heartbeat and this electromagnetic pulse going through the body, and then all the cells have, like, the conductor to be in symphony with and to coordinate. And it's really magnificent, this electromagnetic field of the body. So in my practice, I've got a Rife machine. I don't know if you've heard of it. And I use it to measure the weak electromagnetic field of the body. And then we also can treat by sending electromagnetic pulses to fix the body, to like rejuvenate it. I mean, how does that work? Is there electromagnetic treatments that are also valid, that can actually work in the natural system of the body without giving any side effects?
Yeah, so I think I'm a world expert actually in the use of low energy lasers. Laser is light energy, and I've been using it for maybe 40 years at least. In South Africa, you can buy the Comera, which is the Comera is an electromagnetic device. That's part of the Comera. You can take it off and you can put a different head onto it. So the Comera is also an electromagnetic device, and I've seen miracles happen with the laser, because that also shifted my understanding of ill health. I started in the early days of my practice, 1980, I think 82. I did my first acupuncture course, and at the time, I was sitting next to a homeopath, and he kept saying to me, "You don't need needles for acupuncture." I said, "What do you mean I don't need needles?" He said, "No, you can use a laser." I said, "Are you telling me that you can use a laser to stimulate acupuncture points?" He said, "Yeah, if you got some time, come and spend with me." I had some time, and I watched him using a laser, and he got me a laser. He was going to France at the time, and he came back with a laser. And so for the first 2 years of my acupuncture practice, I never used needles. I just used laser light to stimulate. See, lasers are very one-pointed. They're different to the light of your room, which spreads light all over the room. That's why you can see it. Laser light is very, very one-pointed and just is a one point. So that's why you can use it to stimulate acupuncture points. Well, later I got into using acupuncture needles as well. But the point is that needles or laser light can stimulate acupuncture points. And I started to see miracles with both of them. And then I thought to myself, what the hell's going on over here? I don't need drugs. I'm a non-drug doctor. And here I was seeing, the best treatment for back pain, headaches, was my acupuncture needles or my laser. And I was seeing people, I wouldn't allow a person out of my room with the first treatment if there wasn't already some improvement. So I was seeing people walking in with back pain, totally crippled, and walking out, standing up straight with one treatment. It didn't work in everybody. But how many black swans do you have to see to know that you can see black swans? It's just a question of one miracle. One miracle for me is enough for me to continue. And so I was fortunate that my first patient was a frozen shoulder. I can still remember him. And with one needle, I remember one needle in his leg, not in his shoulder. I was using an acupuncture point in his leg, putting the needle in that point, and said to him, can you lift your hand up? And I watched him as his hand went up slowly, all the way up, with one needle. I thought, okay, maybe this is just a placebo effect. He came back a few days later, and I can still see him walking up my driveway, still pumping his hand like this. But after that, that was a miracle for me. And then after that, if I was doing 20 cases of acupuncture or laser a week, I was seeing 2 miracles a week. 2 miracles. Well, how many miracles do you have to see to know that something can work? So I knew then that the body wasn't just, the needles are one thing because you're putting a needle into the physical body, but using light, low energy light, which is 12 milliwatts only. In my first laser was 1 milliwatt. You can't feel anything. It's so low powered. And yet I was seeing miracles happen with that light penetrating into the body. But the interesting thing about the light is that while the needle goes into the physical body and obviously can stimulate whatever acupuncture point is there, the laser is a little bit different to a needle, because the moment the laser penetrates the physical body, the light gets dispersed. It doesn't work like a needle. It gets dispersed by all the different densities that are there. And I was still getting effects, which made me realize that maybe the effects of the light are not inside the body, but on the energy field around the body, and that the laser is working on the energy field and not in the body. But the point is that I was seeing results with both laser, with needles, and on on diverse conditions, all kinds of conditions, And then I was thinking, okay, if I can get results with the needles and the laser without drugs, what's going on here? And that was my question over and over again, because of the practice I was doing. What is going on here? Where is this? What is stimulating healing over here? What is ill health? If one needle can make a difference, if one laser light, which is low powered as anything, can shift ill health, then what's going on? And that was the big question for me, and occupied the rest of my still where my interest is right at this moment. And that's why that website that I said to you, Society to Investigate the Unknown and Unknowable. Now you could say to me, how can you investigate the unknown and unknowable if it's unknown? And that would be a wonderful question and a really interesting discussion.
So, guys, I am going to leave details to Dr. Brom's website. He's got 2 websites, one for his natural medicine and then one about investigating the unknown. I'm going to leave all those details below the video, so you can definitely check it out. So, Dr. Brom, I'm so fascinated about how energy is doing some work in the body. You mentioned the laser and the acupuncture, and the ancient people speak about something called the subtle energy system of the body. From ancient India, they talk about the chakras, which are like these energy transformers, for lack of a better word. And then there's these cables that go through your body. They call them meridians. They might have different names in different cultures. And these meridians take the energy through the whole body to all the different parts. And acupuncture points actually sit along these meridians, so from a little bit of the studies that I've done. And the ancient people said, or they understood that you treat the subtle energy system of the body first. And when that is fixed, the physical body, is sort of like downstream in a way. It gets the benefits of the subtle energy system being correct. But it's so tricky to grasp, right? Because we can't see this subtle energy body. We can't measure it. I mean, you said it's millivolts, right? It's measured in millivolts. I don't know if we can even really measure the subtle energy system. But somehow that system is the control, right, of the physical body, or the governor, and fixing that gets the physical body. It's so reverse from the normal way of doing things. It's like completely on its head. So have you gone and studied like some of the ancient teachings about these energy bodies, meridians and chakras, and and all that. I mean, it sounds like it fits into exactly what you're doing with treating the energy body.
So, I mean, everybody can experience it without any trouble. It's not difficult to experience the chakras, the energy bodies, because we constantly are talking about them. You see, the trouble is that we've all been disempowered by the conventional model, and so we don't even think for ourselves anymore. We all have the experience of it. I mean, as I said, when you say, I think, where do you put your hand? When you say, I feel, where do you put your hand? When you talk about my gut feeling, where do you put your hand? When you talk about your sex center, where do you put your hand? When you talk about I express myself, where do you put your hand? So we know all this because they are energy bodies that we all live with and we all understand, but we've been disempowered. So we no longer investigate it because we think, it's science says it's all nonsense. Well, is it nonsense to you? Where do you put your hand when you talk about I feel? You put it over your heart because that's a massive energy center there. And we constantly talk about a gut feeling. I had a gut feeling. Why? Because they are well known to all of us. And if we had to talk about the unknown, I can even point out to you how you know about the unknown. That's why it's not actually unknown to human beings. It's unknown to science because science can't go there. Science, I mean, quite science. But the thing is that there are now a lot of, if I can call it, science of energy fields. I mean, there is the Heart Math Organization, for example. They do a lot of research, and they do a lot of measurements as well. So there is a level at which you can measure some of these energy fields, like the ECG and the EEG, and there are all kinds of muscular measurements that you can do on muscles, which measure the energy fields around the muscles. When we talk about subtle energy, then we start to run into trouble with regard to science, because science has more difficulty measuring subtle energy. I mean, there's Killian photography, which takes photographs of these so-called bodies. So there are attempts to try and measure and photograph these energy bodies. They are there, but you don't need to wait for science to measure them. All of us, I mean, I've spent most of my life trying to be in touch with that. For example, we use the word ego and soul. Well, everybody uses those words. How come? Because we all know that there's a difference between the ego and the soul. We all know that the ego is more self-centered and interested only in itself, whereas the soul carries other qualities like unconditional love and compassion. So we know all this. How do we know that? Science hasn't proven any of that at all. But human beings use these words all the time. I mean, I wrote an article a little while back about how so-called skeptics of natural approaches and skeptics of spirit, and skeptics of all the alternative, but going to their house and you'll find all kinds of objects that they regard as valuable or important in their life. Whatever that object is, it could be a stone that they've picked up somehow, it becomes suddenly important to them. If they pick up a horseshoe, they'll put it outside their door. If they're gamblers, they have all kinds of secret codes and things like that they use. So even though they're skeptics, they're not pure skeptics, because they believe in a whole lot of stuff that has got nothing to do with science at all. The thing is that what science has managed to do is make a separation between the objective world and the subjective world. And the subjective world is not real. The objective world is real. Now, one of the challenges with when my doctors come on the teaching course, I often ask them, which is more real, the subjective world or the objective world? Well, most of them will say the objective world is more real than the subjective world. But the fact is that your whole reality is subjective. What the tree that you see out there is the photons have to pass through your eyes along the nerves into the brain where it's seen. The brain is where that tree is, not out there. In absolute terms, whatever you're seeing out there is subjective, not objective. In absolute terms of your experience, you are seeing the world inside you, which is subjective. And how can science deny all your... I mean, the scientists themselves are using intuition, are using feeling, are using inspiration to do their science. It's all subjective. And yet they deny the subjective and say only the objective world is real, which is total nonsense. The subjective world is more real than the objective world.
What happens is the Newtonian physics, which I guess applies to the physical world that we understand, like large matter. The Newtonian physics and rules, they don't apply when you go into the atom, when you go into the quantum world, into this tiny microscopic place. It's like Newtonian physics don't anymore, because now there's no physical matter, it's just energy, but moving so fast it gives the perception that there's something physical, right? So I guess the quantum physics and that's why quantum physics is a whole field. I guess it's trying to understand the function in the quantum level, right? And it's I guess it's something that's very difficult to link to the physical, right?
Quantum scientists now are getting into the story. And the reason is very, very interesting. First of all, the quantum scientists have broken matter down right into the particles, so they know that matter doesn't exist, that it's all energy information. But secondly, they've been forced to bring the observer back into the equation. And that was a major, major turnaround for science, because up till that moment, the observer was not part of the experiment. The observer was just the one that did the work. But suddenly, the science, the quantum science is showing that the mere act of observing changes what you observe. The act of observation changes what you observe. So they brought the observer back into the equation. And that was a major, major turnaround, because suddenly consciousness itself became interesting to scientists, because they realized the observer and consciousness, okay, if the mere act of observing changes what you observe, then it also shifts the understanding of science, because suddenly the scientist is part of the process of creativity, part of the we are creators, because we are participating in the creative process. So that's why I have a book somewhere around, it's called Mind Over Matter. Mind Over Matter, written by 20 quantum scientists. So the quantum scientists are now going into investigating consciousness, because they can't leave consciousness out of the experiment. They see it's part of the equation is the observer. So so quantum science has moved, and why I love quantum science, because quantum science has given me a language that I can start to use in my teaching, like the observer makes a difference to what observes, which changes the whole doctor-patient relationship. Because the doctor-patient relationship is no longer just you sitting there impersonal, with a patient over there who's got a disease. I mean, can you imagine now? This is where conventional model is. The doctor is the observer, the patient is with a disease, and the doctor must fix the disease. The new model that's developing here is totally different. The doctor is a part of the creative process. His very act of being present is going to change what he's observing, which is the patient. So the doctor can no longer remove himself as part of the placebo response. The doctor now is part of the placebo response, the way he meets the patient, his attitude or the direction. So, and not only that, his ECG, his electromagnetic recording, is also feeding information to the patient who's got an electromagnetic recording 1 meter outside their body. Can you see what's happening here? This is a whole new ball game in medicine for me. And then the very, very fact that we're dealing not just with biochemistry, the fact that we're dealing with the body now, which is talking to us. The body is, the symptoms and signs are health talking to us and asking for help. That's what's sitting there across the way from me. Is somebody with symptoms and signs which I need to pay a lot of attention to, because that is health speaking. And the health in the person, when I'm talking about health, well, what am I talking about? I'm talking about consciousness. I'm talking about soul. I'm talking about a unique being. I'm talking about energy information. That's not just a simple body sitting there. I'm talking about astonishing complexity. I'm talking about something which I regard as sacred. All the way deep, that person is not, the body is just the outward expression of energy information slowed down to the point at which it has become visible. But that energy information is touching the most sacred place in a person, his beingness, which is in touch with the Creator, or whatever names you want to call it. So for me, this is what healing is about. This is what medicine is about. It's an alchemic process. It's a magical process. It's an art form, and not where the conventional model has taken it.
So, Dr. Brom, you mentioned this. Matter is just energy, right? And there's a very famous formula that has been. I mean, the whole world knows this formula, and it tells us exactly that story. It's the Einstein's formula, E equals mc squared. I'm sure you're familiar with that formula. And what it means is, I'm going to put it up on the screen for our viewers. Energy equals mass multiplied by c squared. And c squared is, I think, the speed of light in this equation. So you have energy equals mass times a constant. And if you divide both sides of the equation by that constant, you get mass is equal to energy divided by c squared, right? I mean, that formula is exactly what you said right now, that all mass is actually just energy, but reduced to a slow speed that we can actually see it. It's like energy reduced by the speed of light squared, if you actually take the equation, right? And it's slowed down so much. Oh, now we can actually see it and experience it, because otherwise it's just too fast. But the point, I guess, is that's just one layer, is the physical world. But energy is got so much more layers. And the physical world is the slowest form of energy. It's energy that's been slowed down the most to get to this physical state. So it's so slow that it's like, looks like it's physical. But as you get higher forms of energy, they're not physical, but they're much more powerful on our physical body. And I think that's really the essence of what you're trying to get across, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, so it's important, because, I mean, the trouble is that our sensory apparatus has got restrictions, serious restrictions. So the eyes can only see the visible spectrum, but the spectrum is much bigger. So what you're seeing through your senses are a very limited reality. And we need to understand that, because otherwise we become so damn arrogant in thinking that what I see is all there is. No. Your eyes can only see a small range. Your ears hear a small range. Your smell is a small range. There's a vast, that was my experience with a microscope and with the hypnosis. There's a vast range of reality that we don't see. We are stuck from our sensory apparatus. We have other senses, like feeling, for example. Feeling takes us deeper. Knowing is connected to another depth of information. So we have other senses, but the trouble is that we tend to rely very often on the sensory apparatus, which gives us a very limited view of the world. But reality is much bigger, and for me to slowly get in touch with reality, when I go walking in the wetlands, for example, I have two bushes that I always stop by and have a conversation with. Now you could say, come on, Bernard, how can you have a conversation with bushes? Well, the fact is that when I walk past those bushes, I get stopped. Now you could say it's all psychological, but if we keep saying that, if we keep dismissing our experience, then we miss out. That's all I'm saying. You know, you can read about nature spirits, and you can totally disregard it. If you disregard it, you're never going to experience it. If you open your mind to the experience of nature spirits, I promise you, at some point, you're going to experience it. I mean, that's why, I mean, in this whole conversation around walking in nature, talking to trees, hugging trees, walking on grass, there's science to it even today. The science of walking on grass, for example, there's a lot of science to it. It increases longevity. It changes your blood pressure. Hugging a tree, there's good science to it. I've written an article on the power of prayer, for example. There's good science to the power of prayer. Now, if you think about that, for example, that one person at one end of the world can influence another person at the other end of the world, then my question would be, where do you begin and end as a person? Where do you begin and end if you can influence somebody at the other end of the world? That to me is such an awesome thought, and brings up a question of, what do I carry with me? Do I carry really enough love in my heart that I can influence the whole world? Or am I going to continue having negative emotions? If my prayer can make an influence to somebody at the other end of the world, and there's science to it, there's good science to it as well. So all I'm pointing to here is something much bigger, something much more vast, something that's, I think, is sacred, something that is beautiful and awesome. And it's time for human beings to throw away the yoke of the scientific model that they are stuck with. It's a limited scientific model. And to empower themselves again with the ability that we have the tools, not just our sensory tools. We have other tools, feeling. We have mind, consciousness, and that's what all the ancients knew about and what they've spoken about. Is this the bigger, what I call the greater anatomy of human beings? We are totally magical. We need to own it and start to become more sensitive to those parts of ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's really brilliant. So, guys, I hope you've really learned about the principles and philosophy of natural medicine. Dr. Brom, I am going to leave details to his book down below the video so you guys can check it out. Dr. Brom, I really appreciate your wisdom. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers have learned a lot about a different way of approaching health and seeing illness as health calling for help. I mean, these are just like completely different paradigms of how to approach looking after yourself. And I really think it can have a positive impact for people to take control of your own health, listen to your body, get comfortable with understanding, how your body is talking to you. And this can only do good for you. Dr. Brom, we really appreciate it. We hope you can come again in the future and share some more wisdom on other topics. Sounds like you have a wealth of information.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.